Hello, thank you for being here. Today I am finally doing my video where I talk about my top 10 favorite books that I read in 2025. I've been really excited to make this video, and now it is here. A few things before I get started with my list. For one, this list is only containing books that are fiction. I will have a video coming out very shortly after this talking about the best nonfiction books that I read, so that will be there as well. I will also be talking about nonfiction. When I talk about each of the books on this list, I'm going to give some statistics about them. Like, I'll say the year that they were published, the genre that they're in, the category, what type of edition I read it in, like if it was a paperback, ebook, etc., and how many pages it was. I'll also mention if each of the books on this list are a standalone or part of a series, and if they're part of a series, then what number in the series they are. I'll mention what perspective it's in, like first, second, or third person. I'll mention if it has just one point of view or multiple, and what time of the year I read it, like which month. So I'm going to say quite a bit of information about the book, so if you've never heard of these, which a lot of them you probably won't have, especially if you haven't seen many of my videos before, hopefully that will give you a lot of information about the books that may help you decide if you'd like to read them as well. And if you have any additional questions, if anything I don't go over in these books, please let me know. I will also be saying what the books are about. Each of these books I have individual reviews of on my channel, and I'll link those in the description. Let me know if that doesn't work. So if you want to see additional thoughts on those books, then you can watch those. Most of them are spoiler-free reviews. But yes, if you have any additional questions, feel free to ask in the comments. In my reviews, I say what my star rating of the book is. Of course, all these books are 5 stars. These books weren't a struggle to get through. These books were delightful, and I really enjoyed them. At the end of the video, I'll be giving some additional statistics as well, like about authors and stuff, and you'll see what I mean. I really enjoy making lists and ranking things. Sometimes that can be hard, especially when there are a lot, but I think it's satisfying to have read all these books and then put them in a list and now talk about them. I also want to mention how I made this list throughout 2025. So I did not come together at the end of the year and then think about all the books I read and put them in a top 10. I did it throughout the year. So I would read a book, and if I felt that it was worthy to be on the list, then I put it on there. I wanted to keep this list to 10 books. So eventually, when I got to a point where one had to be taken off the list, I just removed it. I will have some honorable mentions in this, but those aren't necessarily all books that were on the list at one point. There really weren't that many that were on the list that got taken off. It was not until maybe August, September, around that time, where I started to have so many that they got taken off. So it took quite a while, and this list was developed throughout the year. And then after having added a book to that list, when I read another that I felt deserved to be on that list, I thought about where it would go. Like, did I like it more or less than the last book I put on there, which gets a little more complicated as the year goes on and there are multiple books on the list, but that's how I did it. And that might be an easier system for you if you want to do something similar rather than thinking of all the books you read at the end of the year, because then the books that you read in the beginning may not be as fresh in your memory, and so you might put books you read near the end of the year more towards the top just because you remember them better, and for me that's not how I wanted to do it. I also wanted to explain a couple of emojis that I will put on screen in editing about these books that are basically just little indicators. So if I put a chick emoji on screen, that means that this book was a new release in 2025, meaning it came out that year. And if I put this little note writing emoji, that means that the book is self-published. I enjoy supporting smaller self-published authors, smaller musical artists. I read and listen to plenty of big artists as well, but I think it's important to support smaller ones, and I want to do more of that, so I will just be saying if a book was self-published, maybe that will give you more of an incentive to check it out. But I don't mean to pressure or guilt anyone. Now with all that out of the way, we can get started on the list. So number 1 that I will talk about near the end will be my favorite book that I read this year. So starting with number 10, we have A Planet of Blood and Ice by A.J. Hartley. This is the first book in the Cathedrals of Glass series. This was published in 2017. It is science fiction, but I'd say also a bit of a dystopian, and it has some thriller aspects to it as well, but I would say it's primarily science fiction. And it is young adult. This hardcover edition that I read from was 341 pages. This book is told in first person with just one POV, and I read this book in August. So this book, I think, has a pretty interesting premise. It is about a group of 10 teenagers who live in this futuristic society who were sent on a ship to a moon that contains a re-education facility because they have all broken the rules and need to be re-educated, but they do not end up going to that moon. Instead, they end up on an ice planet called Valkyris, which is a planet that they've all heard of, but they were taught that it was uninhabited, and they're all scared when they get there because they have no idea how they're going to survive, and they don't know why they didn't end up where they were supposed to go. So it is about these teenagers exploring and just trying to survive, and they learn things about themselves and the planet along the way. This book is told from the perspective of a teenage girl named Sola, And I think one of the interesting things about this book, besides its premise already, was just learning about the world that they come from and what it's like for them back home. Like, the situation that they're in, where they're all closely together in this ship, is not natural for them. They live in a society where face-to-face, in-person interaction isn't very common, so they're pretty uncomfortable being around each other in this way. And they don't really have the technology that they're used to at home, and things are just very different for them. Basically, the way we live is very different from the way that they live. Even with the technology we have, they are in a more extreme, advanced version of it, and their world is different, and I enjoyed learning more about their world as it went on. But as I said, I would kind of describe it as dystopian. Being young adult, I think there's definitely some of that teenage angst in here. I thought the characters and their interactions with each other were enjoyable. The setting was nice as well. I usually like snowy settings. So I thought this book was pretty good. I thought it was interesting, I thought it was entertaining, and I thought it had some good themes about humans and connection and things like that. I think I'll put that book up here, and then over time you will see the stat grow. So number 9 is On Lavender Tides by Travis M. Riddle. This is the first book in the 6-book Jekkoa series, which is a progression fantasy series that is inspired by the Pokemon franchise, but it is very much its own thing. Like, it's clearly inspired by it, and the author doesn't act like it's not, but it definitely has some differences, some of which I think are kind of better than Pokemon. This book was published in 2022. The series was finished in 2024. I would consider this young adult. It could maybe be considered sort of middle grade as well. It's not terribly mature, but then again, I also haven't read the rest of the series yet, but I really look forward to doing that. I'm calling it young adult because the main characters are 18, but it wasn't extremely mature or inappropriate for teenagers either. This paperback edition that I read from was 375 pages. This book was told in third person, and there are 2 point of views that it follows. I read this book in May and early June. So this book, like I said, is inspired by Pokemon. Our first main character is Vault, who is very passionate about Jekkoas. Jekkoas are their version of Pokemon. That's what they're called. None of the same names are used, but if you're familiar with Pokemon and how that stuff works, you may see what the equivalents are in their world, but they also have some things that are completely new and different. Vault had a grandmother who was like one of the biggest Jekkoa summoners, and he wants to be like her. But because this is progression fantasy and he's just on the start of his journey, he's at the very bottom. And he did a lot of studying and stuff as a kid, but now he is finally of age to actually become a summoner and start imprinting Jekkoas. As I said, imprinting. And that's one of the main differences between Jekkoas and Pokemon. In Pokemon, you capture them in a ball and they stay there. This one has a bit more of a humane, different version where you would just imprint them like you see one in the wild, and then you can get like their data on their device that they use, which isn't exactly a ball, and then you're able to summon like sort of a hologram of them whenever you want, and so when they're in a battle, no animal is actually being harmed. So I think that is one of the issues that some people have with Pokemon. They don't like that creatures are getting hurt, so that doesn't really happen in this. So Vault is at the very beginning of his journey. At the beginning of this book, he has not caught his first Jekkoa, but he wants to, and he just loves Jekkoas, and I enjoyed how passionate he was. I thought that he was a relatable character in some ways as well. And then the other main character is his best friend, Alani, who he has known for a long time. Alani is part of a local church. Now, I believe the religion of the church isn't like a real religion, but it's like made up for the world. This is fantasy, so there's a lot of stuff that may be based on or inspired by things in the real world, but she goes to the Church of Salt and Sanction. That is a big part of her life, and she, also coming of age in her own way, is sent on a mission to go to different islands and to do things that the church has requested she do, and she is advised to take a Jekkoa summoner with her for protection against the creatures that may be there. So she decides to take Vault on the journey with her. So they're both doing their own journey, but together. And so that's how the dual POV works. So for most of the book, they are together. So this book is very adventurous, and I found it funny and really entertaining. I don't think I ever really found it boring. I like the world building in it. The way this author does his world building is he'll do it as it becomes relevant to the story, and yeah, I just thought it was a good story. I liked the friendship between the 2 characters. I liked the stuff with the church, like these ideas of kind of questioning things that you've been taught. I thought that was good. It was fun learning about the different Jekkoa creatures that there are and the different types there are. I think this was just a fun story, and if you like Pokemon, I definitely think you should check this out, especially if you would like more of just a good story, because I've heard this from the author. Now, I haven't played a lot of Pokemon games, so I can't really say, but he said that basically he liked the games growing up, but he felt that they didn't really have much of a good story, and that makes sense. I feel like usually video games are more focused on the gameplay rather than coming up with a good narrative, but this being a whole novel and, well, a whole series, it actually has what I think so far is a pretty good story. But even if you don't know much about Pokemon, I wouldn't say that you would understand nothing going on in this book. Like, if you are familiar, you'll be able to figure out what certain things are referencing, like what their equivalent is. But I think that if you aren't as familiar with it, or you only know a little bit or nothing at all, you could still enjoy this if you like fantasy, because I don't think it's that complicated, at least not in this first book. And I think that it's explained well. So I don't think you need to have played Pokemon extensively in order to enjoy this, because I haven't either. I just know a little bit, enough from like the anime and stuff to understand this, but I don't think you need to. They live in a completely different made-up world from us, and I think that the way it's described is really nice. I mean, as you can see on the cover here, the waters are purple, so it just sounds really pretty. Very much had beach vibes. I don't know if the other books will have that as much, but some of the settings here just sounded really nice. It felt really immersive. I think the author is really good at describing things, but not in a way where it's just like boring and drags on, but in an enjoyable way. Like, I'm hearing about the senses and I'm enjoying them. So that was another thing I really liked. Just the setting was really nice. And just a little note I wanted to say about this one before I move on. I used to be a member of this author's Patreon, so my name is in the acknowledgements of this book, which I think is pretty cool. Just my first name. You can see it there somewhere. My name is also in the acknowledgements of his book Dirt King, the third book in the Houndstooth trilogy, because I was on his Patreon during the time that both those books were released. And that is one of the benefits of his highest tier on his Patreon. So I think it's cool that my name is in the acknowledgements of a book, and it's actually me, not just someone who happens to have the same name. I mentioned that that book came out in 2022 and my name was in the acknowledgements. I believe those would be the only two books where my name would be in the acknowledgements of his books, but I just didn't get to reading the book until 2025. But I did read the first few chapters on his Patreon shortly before it came out. That was another thing, you were able to read some of them early before the book came out. He released the first few on there just for his patrons. But when I read the book in 2025, I just started from the beginning. I guess I should also add that all these books are first-time reads for me. None of these are rereads, other than the first few chapters of On Lavender Tides, but even then, that was a few years ago at this point. The next three books I don't have physical copies of, so I'll just put a photo of them on the screen. So number 8 is Louder Than Hunger by John Shu. This is the only novel in verse on this list. This book was published in 2024. I would say it is realistic fiction, maybe also considered historical because it does take place in the 90s, which wasn't that long ago, but maybe that would be considered historical fiction. It's not really about a historical event, but let me know if you think that would count. That's why I haven't called it contemporary, because it does not take place exactly in the present, but the events aren't that different from what could happen today, and I'm sure they still do. But anyway, this is middle grade. The hardcover edition I read from, that I borrowed from the library, was 506 pages, but because it is a novel in verse, you can read it very fast. I read it in 3 days. Some would read it even faster. There aren't like a bunch of words on each page, so if I had a physical copy of it for this video, it would look way bigger than all the others, but not have as many words as it looks like it does. This book is a standalone. It is told in first person with just one POV, and I read this book in late June and early July. This book is about a boy named Jake who struggles with an eating disorder, and it gets to a point where it becomes really severe and debilitating, and he goes to a facility for it to get treatment. But that doesn't just fix everything right away. He goes on quite a journey with it as he struggles with his mental health, anxiety, and things going on at home. But he does have a good relationship with his grandmother, and he loves visiting her and spending time with her and talking about Broadway plays and stuff with her. So it was really nice seeing his relationship with her, and also kind of the, I guess you could say sort of parasocial, but I wouldn't call them like stalkerish or obsessive relationships that he's developed with like certain artists that he likes, or there's like a statue at the park, and just hearing his thought process on things. I thought this was a really powerful story, and the author says, I think in an author's note or the acknowledgements or somewhere later on in this book, that this book is very much based on his own experiences, which is probably why it takes place in the 90s. It's probably based on when his childhood took place. So it is very much his own story. I'm sure some things are switched around a little bit, but it may be very similar to his own story. And I think that makes it even more powerful that it's based on a true story, and people do go through those things. This was really informative because it went over some things I've struggled with and some things I don't have any personal experience with. And that's a wonderful thing about reading, to get those kinds of representation and to learn more about other people's situations that you may never go through, because even if you don't go through them, you'll probably meet someone who has, and it can help you just a little bit more to understand them and know how to support them, or maybe even offer a book to them that may describe what they're going through to give them hope. And resources. Some of the books on this list do contain representation, whether for a disability or mental illness or just differences in general. And I think that that is really important to me in books. I think I've especially learned that this year. I mean, I kind of already knew that, but that has really been solidified recently for me. So I really enjoy reading books that offer me perspectives that I otherwise wouldn't really know anything about. They've helped me learn things and helped me understand better and have helped me to be a more compassionate person. Louder Than Hunger was one of those books where once I read it, I was just like, wow, that was profound. And it was difficult to read at times. It was very honest. It didn't really hold back on the way that Jake felt. I feel like it went into detail, and it was kind of hard to read, like, emotionally, but I'm glad that I read it, and I thought it was important that I read it. But it wasn't like I wasn't enjoying it and wanted to stop reading it. Not at all. Like, I enjoyed it and I was invested in it, and I think that it is so far the best novel in verse that I have read. I've read a few, but I think that was the best one I've read so far. It was also interesting just seeing his relationships with other people at the facility. Like, there's this one girl he makes a friendship with, and that was nice. Definitely a very important and impactful book. Number 7 is A Kind of Spark by Elle McNichol. I also borrowed this from the library. This was published in 2020. This is contemporary / realistic fiction. It is middle grade. The hardcover edition I read from was 176 pages, so it's not very long at all, but in its small length, I think that it does a lot. It accomplishes a lot and gives a lot of good information, while also telling an entertaining story. This is a standalone, and it is told in first person by a single POV. I read this book in April, fitting that I read it in Autism Awareness Month, because this book is about a young girl named Addie. She lives in Scotland. Addie lives with her parents and her 2 older twin sisters. One of her twin sisters is autistic and one is neurotypical. So the book does go over her relationships with her family, especially her siblings, especially the one sister who is autistic, and I enjoyed those relationships. I very much enjoy books that focus on relationships, not just romantic ones, but like family, friendships, things like that. Maybe even a relationship with someone's teacher. There is a teacher in this book that's one of her main relationships, but that's not such a positive one, so that can be a representation of how some teachers are not very nice or open-minded or understanding, especially with students with disabilities. But anyway, this book is about Addie learning in school about the witch trials that happened where she lived many years ago, and she's quite distraught to learn about them. She feels really bad for the witches. She feels a lot of sympathy for them, and she wonders if maybe they were just like her, just a little different and misunderstood, and then ended up losing their lives for them. So she can't stop thinking about these witches. And she learns more about them, and she decides that she wants her town to set up a memorial to acknowledge that they were there. So this book is about her journey of trying to achieve that. But aside from that, it is also just about her autistic experience. I could relate to it very much. Before reading this, I realized I hadn't read very many books with autistic characters, which was kind of surprising to me, but I absolutely want to read more. I found it very relatable. I understood a lot of what she was feeling and felt that I could often feel it too. Even when I wasn't going through the exact situations as her, I was like, yeah, I know what that feels like. And it was interesting just watching her experiences in school. Like I said, she has a teacher that's not very nice. There are some students that aren't very nice, but there are also some students at school that are nicer. You learn more about what it's like for her. One thing I really like about this book is I feel that it acknowledges and breaks down some stereotypes about autistic people, and I think that's important. I definitely think that this book could be good for an autistic or neurotypical person, because if they're autistic, then they can find themselves in a character and relate to them, and if they aren't, then they can learn more about that experience and have some things debunked that they may have thought to be true based on things they'd heard or believed themselves from not having personal experience. There are some things you won't quite understand unless you've experienced them yourself. So I think this book could be beneficial for anyone to read, especially people who are still in school. But even if not, you're going to know autistic people in your life, whether you realize it or not, whether they realize it or not. So it's good to read, and I definitely want to read more books by this author. Number 6 is the 4th volume of Heartstopper by Alice Oseman. I read the first 5 volumes in 2025 for the first time and really enjoyed them, some more than others. This one I decided was good enough to be put on the list. I also read the novella this winter, and I look forward to the 6th book coming out. I also recently just read the Heartstopper yearbook, which I will have a review of coming out soon. And I do plan on reading the novella Nick and Charlie, but I believe that takes place after the end of the main Heartstopper series, so I think I'll read that afterwards. But I've really been enjoying everything that there is in this series. It's been my first time reading Alice Oseman. I think she's becoming one of my favorite authors. More about that later, but I'm really enjoying the kind of just her art and her writing and the representation and things that she puts in her books, things that are important to her. I'm really liking her so far. This is the only graphic novel on this list, and when I mention things like the only graphic novel or the only novel in verse, I'm not including the honorable mentions, just the main list. We'll get to that. Anyway, this graphic novel was released in 2021. I would call it a contemporary romance. The paperback edition of this that I read was 350 pages. It is number 4 out of 6 in a series. It has multiple POVs. Can't really say if it's told in first or third person because it's a graphic novel, so it's a little different. And I read this book in September. So I had already been enjoying the series quite a bit, but this volume I just thought was really good. So Heartstopper is a series about 2 British high school boys who meet and develop a romantic relationship. And I've just found it very sweet and wholesome and informative. This book has themes of sexuality and figuring out your identity and how you want to share that with others, if you even want to, do you need to, things like that. And it's been quite informative for things that I cannot personally relate to. I really enjoy the 2 boys, Nick and Charlie, and their interactions together. I think that they genuinely really like each other and are very supportive of each other. It's not just about physical attraction or doing physical things with each other. Like, they really seem to actually have a good, healthy relationship, which I really appreciate when reading romance, because I want to read more romance, but it seems a lot of the time it's just all about the physical stuff, which I don't want to read, or it's very toxic and romanticizes toxic things, and I don't want to read that either. Like, if a couple has problems, that's normal, but like, I just don't want to read like dark romance and things like that personally. So what made this 4th volume so good? What's made it my favorite in the series so far? Because I did read the 5th one. I didn't like that one as much as the others, so it wasn't like it just kept getting better and better, but I think the 6th one will probably be pretty good. So the 4th one I really liked for a few different reasons. It was just cute and wholesome in general. I really liked just seeing the characters and their relationships and the way that some things happened. And especially this one got really deep because this one goes over one of the characters having an eating disorder, and not only does it go over that, similar to Louder Than Hunger, I learned some things about that, but even though I read about it in Louder Than Hunger, this was a different perspective because people who experience that aren't always going to experience the exact same things. I mean, for one, there are a few different types of eating disorders. It's not always exactly the same, and even if the characters do have the same, it's not going to be experienced and treated the exact same way, especially when these are in 2 different countries. Louder Than Hunger takes place in America. What I really like is the messages in this book just about how to support someone who is struggling with that, but knowing that, like, it's not your job to fix them. Like, that's not, like, you can help them, but you're not responsible for fixing them, which makes sense, and I think that's true, and I think some people can be too reliant on someone, especially a romantic partner, or they feel that they can fix their romantic partner, but it's like, some things they gotta work on themselves or see a professional for, and that's okay. Like, you can do what you can, but I think it is important to know and acknowledge that it's not your job to fix everything about another person, or sometimes even yourself. Like, it's good to work on yourself, but I'm saying, like I said, sometimes you need outside sources to help you. And so I thought that that was really good and important. That's just how I've been feeling about Alice Oseman lately. Like, she's just good at writing about important things. And the art is a very nice touch as well. I really like her nice art style. It's very pretty, very cute. I love the pets in the books. This one, like Louder Than Hunger, was also a bit difficult to read sometimes, but I was very glad that I was reading it and I really enjoyed it. And like I said, I feel like Nick and Charlie really help each other, and that's really evident in this book especially. And it's just nice to see them be supportive and genuinely helpful towards each other while also handling it in a mature way and knowing that love doesn't necessarily magically fix everything. So it is realistic in that sense. So yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it had some great ideas and messages, and from what I remember of it, I just remember it being a nice escape at the time and just being enjoyable, and it's been my favorite installment of the series so far. Will book 6 be better? I don't know. I don't really know much of what it will entail other than being the end, so we'll see. There were also some more things about family in this book, so I enjoyed seeing more of their families as well. I think that this book is honest but hopeful. It also has some good ideas and themes about trauma and how that works. And I think it does a good job at portraying anxiety. So those were some other things I liked about it. Number 5 is Momentous Events in the Life of a Cactus by Dusty Bowling. This is the sequel to Insignificant Events in the Life of a Cactus. I don't know if there will be more books in this series. There may just be the second one, so maybe it'd be considered a duology. But anyway, this was published in 2019. It is contemporary and middle grade. This paperback edition I read from was 306 pages. It is told in first person, single POV. I read this book in August and September. So the protagonist of this book is a young teenage girl named Avon Green. She lives in Arizona with her adopted parents. Avon was born without arms, but that hasn't really stopped her from doing a lot of things. Some things are a little different for her, or may take a little longer, but she's able to live a pretty good, happy life. Like, she likes to play the guitar and solve mysteries and things like that. And she lives with her parents in this, like, Western amusement park in Arizona. She has a pretty good home life. Her parents are very supportive. They're kind, but they don't really enable her, which I like. And yeah, she's had a pretty good life. And this book is about her starting high school, where her life gets not as good and harder, and she deals with kids being cruel and low self-esteem and insecurity and just a lot of things going on in her life. There are quite a few things going on in here, one of which being she still has more to learn about her biological family, and so a lot of this book is about her trying to figure out stuff about that. This book has a lot of representation, aside from just her having no arms. Like, she has a friend who has Tourette syndrome, so that's just one example. I also enjoyed the ideas in here about friendship, seeing her interactions with her friends. There's a new character who's introduced who works at, I think it's the smoothie shop. Her name is Trilby, and she's really into punk rock music, and she introduces Avon to that, and Avon finds it not only enjoyable, but like empowering. And someone who likes that kind of music myself, that was a pleasant surprise. I had no idea that was going to be a part of this, so I really enjoyed that aspect of it. There were just so many little things in this book that I liked. Avon is a really entertaining protagonist to follow along with. I think that she's funny and clever and witty and just really enjoyable to read about. I thought this book was just so fun. I think Avon's fun to follow along with regardless of where she's at or who she's hanging out with, and the other characters are fun too. And this was the first time I've really seen Avon be feeling down for a long period of time. Like, I think she really goes through a lot in this book and has a lot to learn about herself. So I think that this book was, like a lot of the books on this list, if not all of them, important as well. I think that a lot of people, especially people her age, could benefit from reading this and reading her feelings and seeing how she dealt with them. So this was really fun. Number 4 is the only 2025 release on this list, and it is definitely the most popular of all these books, and that is Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins, the new Hunger Games prequel that follows Haymitch's games. In the past, for those who had read the other Hunger Games books, particularly the main trilogy, they were familiar with the character of Haymitch when he was older and just, for lack of a better word, just a mess, understandably so. But, you know, wasn't taking care of himself, wasn't making healthy decisions, wasn't a very happy person. But in this book, you get to really learn his story. You heard a little bit about it before, but here you really learn about from the time that he was reaped, sorta. Well, they get into that. And then his experience with the games and afterwards and the things that happened to his family and just everything that happened. I thought this book was really interesting, really entertaining, had some good themes in it. It was also very sad, for sure. But I liked the epilogue. I won't say anything else about that, but I did like what they did there. I'm not saying a whole lot about this because I know a lot of people are already familiar with this, but The Hunger Games, if you don't know, is basically a series where their government in this dystopian futuristic world, not futuristic as in really technologically advanced, just takes place in the future, in the remains of what used to be called North America. People live in districts, and the government takes one boy and one girl from each district to fight to the death in the Hunger Games, and it's televised on live TV, and this is basically punishment for people trying to rebel against the capital. So Haymitch was one of the people who participated in the Hunger Games, and then in the trilogy he is a mentor to people of the same district who are the main characters of the series. And this is his story, so you knew that he was in them before, but in this book you learn just like his perspective of it, what he was thinking during that time, and things that you didn't know, and things that happened, and the people he knew. And there were some characters in here that you'll be familiar with if you've read the other books, so it was just really interesting to get his perspective. I've really enjoyed the other Hunger Games books I've read. Well, I've read all of them, and I think that, like, I was able to read a little bit of this when I'd wake up for quite a while. Like, I try to read when I wake up before going on my phone or doing other things, and sometimes I just do a little bit, but with this book I'd often be at it for quite a while and didn't really mind. Like, I'd be okay with reading a whole chapter, for example. I think it was just an interesting story with interesting characters. Like I said, very sad, and it was quite dark, but it was enjoyable for me. I think it's a good story, and I think the survival aspect of it is interesting as well. And then, as I was kind of going on about this, because this is kind of a special case, I'll give the basic statistics of this book. Like I said, this was published in 2025, is considered dystopian. It is a young adult series. This hardcover edition that I read from was 382 pages. This is the second prequel to a trilogy. If you haven't read any of them, I think that it makes sense to read them in the order that they came out. I won't really say why, but it just does make sense. Like, some people might want to start with the first prequel, which wasn't even my favorite, so I don't know if I'd recommend that. That may not get you super into it because the first prequel is by who eventually becomes the main villain of the series. I think it makes sense to read them in the order that they came out. So, The Hunger Games, Catching Fire, Mockingjay, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes and Sunrise on the Reaping, which is how I read them as well. So you don't need to read the prequels in order to understand the trilogy. Of course you don't, because the trilogy came first. I know not everyone has read them. I know a lot of people have, but not everyone has, so I like to give the information for the people who may not be as familiar with the books. This book is told in first person with just one POV, and I read this book in March. That was a pretty good reading month for me in 2025. Looking back at it, I feel like I read a lot of good books at that time. Since this is such a popular book, it did feel fun to get it on release day after having had it pre-ordered, and just to see what other people were saying about it online and seeing the memes and the posts and all that. Like, it was fun to be a part of that with such a big community. Like, I'm not like big into the Hunger Games fandom, like not like super deep into it, but I do like it. I do follow some things related to it online, and I don't read a lot of extremely popular books. Like, I'm open to it. I'm not going to reject a book just because it's popular, but I'm also only going to read it if I feel genuinely interested in it. But thankfully, the Hunger Games is a series that I do genuinely like. We're in the top 3 now, so all the books I've talked about so far were pretty good, but now we're getting into like the really good books. So number 3, I have chosen Trinity by Tom DeLonge and A.J. Hartley. This was published in 2024. This is considered science fiction, but also historical fiction, as it takes place in the fictional town of Trinity, Nevada in 1962. And I'd say it has some thriller aspects to it as well. I would consider this young adult. On A.J. Hartley's website, he has this in the adult section, and I can understand that. It definitely has a lot of mature language and violence, but the main character is a teenager still in high school, so it kind of felt like both young adult and adult for me. I'm going to consider it young adult. I have it in my young adult playlist on my channel, but sort of interchangeable in this case. Sometimes it's kind of hard to tell, but it does follow a lot of teenagers, so it makes sense to me. This hardcover edition that I read from was 294 pages, so it's not very long. This is a standalone. It is told in third person but has multiple POVs. I read this book in June and July. So this book, like I said, takes place in Nevada in 1962. The main character is a teenage boy named Van. He has a younger brother named Andy, and they live with their father. Their parents are no longer together. The mother's still alive. She just doesn't live with them. They're like either separated or divorced. And what this town is known for is atomic bomb testing. And there's this big one that's coming up, and so the town is excited about that. But even before that, there are like mysteries in their family about things that happened, and their father is like really paranoid and they don't fully understand that. For a long time, Van has been having a recurring dream that like really affects him, like he really thinks about it a lot, and he's not sure what exactly it is or what it means. You get to see what's going on in Van's life at home and at school, and I enjoyed those parts. And then once the atomic bomb test happens, a lot starts happening. Like, I'm trying to make this spoiler free, so I won't say much, but then it gets pretty wild. It might seem kind of calm at first, like if you're reading this and you feel like not much is happening. Once you get about halfway through, a lot is going to start happening, and it gets pretty crazy, pretty dangerous. There's like this gang of bullies, but they're not just like typical bullies that'll like call you names, which can still be harmful, but I'm just saying like they're like very violent and actually dangerous. So this book is very high stakes, not just because of them, but because of other things going on too. But basically, Van and his group of friends have seen some things they were not supposed to, and I think that this book was interesting, had some interesting ideas about like just life in general, I guess, like government. And when you hear that, you might think like maybe you won't agree with it, but I feel like it's the kind of thing where like regardless of your beliefs, it kind of just applies to everyone. So that's how I feel about it. I think it has some really important messages, especially towards the end, just about like humanity and how we should treat each other. And it has some cultural relevance as well. This book, another thing I really liked about it was just, you know, I enjoyed the story. I was very invested in the characters. Like, I actually cared about them because, like I said, it gets pretty wild and dangerous. So some of them I was kind of worried about, hoping they'd be all right. And it's just good to care about the characters because I don't always. Like, some characters, it's just like, well, if something happens to them, I won't really feel one way or the other. But here, I definitely cared. Definitely wanted to keep reading it and see how they'd turn out. I think this also has an interesting historical aspect to it. The narrator basically tells the story like as something that happened in the past. I don't just mean that it's told in past tense. Like at the very beginning of it, he's talking about it, then he goes back to when he was younger and starts talking about it. So he's kind of talking about it with the perspective of what he knows now, although that he doesn't interject that a whole lot. Like at one point early on, he mentions like the place they live in and says what the city would end up looking like later on, how it wouldn't be as much like empty land and things like that. But like I said, he doesn't interject a whole lot, so you may forget that after some time that it's being told by that person who's now older. I thought this was a pretty good, entertaining, important book that, like I said, had really high stakes and was quite thrilling. Pretty wild, definitely not cozy. I know some people just want to read that, and that's understandable, but I do recommend this book as well. might be interesting to some people, and I enjoy historical fiction and want to read more of it. I definitely enjoy reading about time periods that I have never personally experienced. Number 2, we're getting close now, is Just Listen by Sarah Dessen. This book was published in 2006. It is contemporary, young adult. This paperback edition I read from is 371 pages. It is a standalone told in first person with a single POV, and I read this in February and March. This was my first book of Sarah Dessen's, and I read a couple other of her books last year and would love to read more from her. I think she's definitely the kind of contemporary young adult author I want to read more from, because I just really enjoy those kinds of stories at the moment. Like Judy Blume, which is how I discovered her, because I wanted to find more authors who were similar to Judy Blume, so the internet recommended her. I really enjoyed this book. So this book is about a high school girl named Annabelle who is a model, and so some people think that she's just like really pretty and perfect and has her life all together, but she really does not. She had something horrible happen to her a little while back ago, and now there are like rumors and misconceptions going around about her, and she's lonely and struggling mentally, I would say. You learn about some friendships that she had that are no longer, and you learn about her family. Her sisters have their own issues that are going on. She lives with her parents and 2 sisters. She meets a boy named Owen who loves music, and she shares music with him, and they talk about it, and he's just different than other people and, you know, isn't popular or going to judge her, really, I would say. And they develop a nice relationship together, which I think is what she needed at the time. Just someone to see her for who she was. She spends time with his little sister as well, who is actually familiar with her modeling work, and so she's kind of like a fan of her. So she's one of those people who thinks Annabelle's just got it all together. And I really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed Annabelle's interactions with Owen and seeing them talk about music together. Owen is very dedicated to always telling the truth, so that's one thing about him. And she finds that interesting because she can't fully relate. And it was just interesting hearing about her family and their struggles. And again, there's more eating disorder representation in this with one of the characters, so I guess there's a lot of that on this list, so I learned quite a bit about that last year. This book is just the type of book I like to read. I like to read some others as well. As you can see, there are quite a few different genres on this list, but yeah, I thought it was really easy to follow along with, which I've learned about her writing style is just easy, maybe because it's contemporary, but yeah, like, just wasn't hard at all to focus on, for me anyway. I thought it was just fun with some really important ideas and messages as Annabelle goes through this journey and learns things about herself and learns how to handle things, and I thought that that was really nice. And number 1, my favorite book that I read in 2025, and what I'm currently considering my favorite book of all, is This Song Is Not For You by Laura Nowlin. This was published in 2016. It is contemporary and young adult, but I'd say it also involves romance as well. This paperback edition that I read was only 230 pages. This is a standalone and is told in first person with 3 different POVs of our 3 main characters. I read this in late January, early February. Did not take long at all. I was really invested in this, and once it got going, which didn't take long, I read most of it in one night. So this book is about this group of teenagers, Ramona, Sam, and Tom, and they are in a band. Tom is newer to the band, but Ramona and Sam had started it, and sort of a love triangle situation going on here. Like, Ramona and Sam have feelings for each other, but they're not together, and then when Tom comes in, that just makes things even more complicated, so there's that going on. But this isn't just a silly little love story. What I liked about this book was, I mean, I did enjoy the characters and the things that they did, and the music aspect, the band aspect, all that. I enjoyed that, and I enjoyed the plot, but I also just really liked the representation that it contained, and the ideas that it had. Like, if you don't quite understand what the title means, I feel like the book explains that towards the end, so I don't really want to say what it all means, but just had some really good ideas, I think, that were really important about understanding others and being confident in yourself. I'll basically say that to put it very simply. There's more to it than that, but that's what I'll say. Like, there is a little bit of dyslexia representation in this. There's asexuality representation in this, which I really appreciated. I feel like I haven't seen much of in books thus far, but I want to read more, and I've got some on my TBR. And I thought this was just a nice story with some interesting progressive ideas. It's not going to be everyone's thing, which is kind of one of the whole points of the book, and I'm not even saying I recommend everyone read this. I mean, they want to if they can. It's not the most culturally relevant book out there. I definitely think it has important ideas, but it's not like a book that I feel everyone needs to read. It's just what I personally enjoy. Like, I'm rating these books in this list based on how much I enjoy them. That's how I give my star ratings. So I love this. This was definitely for me. It's not for everyone, but it was for me. It's not very long, but I feel it still accomplishes a lot, and I think that if that's all the author had to say, then I think it's better to do it this way than putting in a lot of filler. so I was satisfied with it. I think it could help people get into reading as well, because a lot of books are really long, and I think some people don't want to commit to really long books. I'm glad that there are some books out there that are not as long. I don't mind long books though, but I was satisfied with this one's length. I guess it's very much considered coming of age, but I guess maybe all young adult stories are. But yeah, I think it's about love and relationships and other things, and I just know that when I read it, I really enjoyed it. More so than any other book I read in 2025. So I'm really glad that I found this book in a thrift store. I hadn't known about it before, but it got my attention. I have not read Laura Nowlin's other books. I know that they are more popular, but I do hope to get to those this year. I don't know if I will enjoy them as much as this one. I'm kind of nervous that I won't, but that shouldn't taint my opinion of this book. So there's the beautiful stack of books, my favorites of 2025. I do not have a physical copy of Louder Than Hunger, A Kind of Spark, or Heartstopper Volume 4, which I'm fine with. I'm not really planning on getting one. I'm grateful that I can borrow a lot of books from the library and save money that way. Like, I saved hundreds of dollars just by using the library last year, so it's a great resource. So I really enjoyed telling you about those books. If you've read any of them, I'd love to hear your thoughts on them. If you have any recommendations by any of those authors or just anything you'd like to share, please do. Now I want to give a few statistics. So I wanted to talk about the categories of these books, like categories, not genre. So like, what age range are they for? And just tell you how many of them were part of each. So like, there's middle grade, young adult, and adult. The 3 of these books were middle grade, 7 were adult, and 0 were adult. So no adult books. I do read some, but none made it onto this list this time. I said Trinity is sort of half young adult, half adult in a way, but yeah, I personally am categorizing it as young adult for this book. It made more sense to me, but I understand if someone considers it adult. Half of these were standalones, and half were part of a series. So that's interesting. We got half and half there. Were there any authors who were mentioned more than once, who have more than one book on this list? Yes, A.J. Hartley is on this list twice, with both The Planet of Blood and Ice and Trinity. I've read more of his books than those, and I definitely want to read a lot more of his books. He's definitely become one of my favorite authors. I wanted to talk about if any of these authors I read for the first time in 2025. Many of them I did. John Shu, Elle McNichol, Alice Oseman, Sarah Dessen, and Laura Nowlin were all first-time authors for me. As for if my very first book I read from them made it onto this list, that applies to all of them except for Alice Oseman. So I think that's a pretty nice accomplishment that, for a lot of them, the first book of theirs I read I really loved. And I definitely want to read a lot more by a lot of these authors. I do think that Laura Nowlin, Elle McNichol, Sarah Dessen, and Alice Oseman are contenders for my favorite authors. I want to read a little bit more by them, but I am starting to feel more that way about Alice Oseman, especially after just having read the Heartstopper yearbook. Like, I read that this year in 2026. I'm feeling pretty strongly about her work. The others I think I gotta read some more by, but I'm sure I'll really like Elle McNichol, especially having that autism representation. Just gotta read more by her, and I really look forward to it. I just wanted to give a few honorable mentions. Reviews of each of these books are on my channel if you'd like to learn more about them. I won't say a whole lot about them, just a little. One book I wanted to mention was Heaven Looks a Lot Like Them All by Wendy Mass, a young adult sort of maybe magical realism story, novel told in verse, about a teenage girl named Tessa who gets knocked out at school during a game of dodgeball, and then she's in like this world that's this mall that she grew up in because her parents worked there, and she's kind of going through different parts of her life associated with different objects from the mall and reflecting on her past actions. So it was a very interesting concept to me, and because it's in verse, it didn't take very long to read. The first 3 volumes of Heartstopper by Alice Oseman, and this middle grade graphic novel Speechless by Erin Nell Steinke, this story about selective mutism and anxiety. I definitely resonated with a lot in here and found it useful. I do want to say one extra thing about this book, that one of the things that really stuck with me from it, and I love when I read something from a book and it sticks with me, especially if it's something that helps me, is just about panic attacks, like how when they happen, of course, yeah, there are different ways to deal with them, but like one thing is just letting them pass. Like, you're gonna feel the way you feel and then it will be over. And so that's something that I've remembered, and that's been very helpful for me. So thank you so much for watching this video. It was a lot of fun to make and to talk about these books. I really look forward to seeing the great books I'm gonna read in 2026. I haven't read a lot so far this year. It is the beginning of February as I'm recording this, but I'm sure I will read many great books this year, some of which from the same authors, some of which from authors I've never read before, probably. And I'll probably make a video quite similar to this at either the end of 2026 or beginning of 2027 in a similar format. You can let me know what you thought of all the statistics and stuff. Personally, I really enjoyed doing it that way. I think that was a really nice, organized way of doing it. This video is probably going to be pretty long, maybe even my longest video yet, and if so, that's kind of exciting. I'm sure there'll be some people who will stick around for the whole thing, and if you've done so, thank you. And yeah, just thank you for watching in general.